Well, hello there, lads. My name is John, and I want to talk about this album from 1966. I want to do a review of my album.
Well, maybe Paul can chime in and bloody talk about this album, John.
Paul, I'm doing the review of the 1966 album Revolver. This is Clark the Shark at 1-800-449-8255. And I'm talking about the Beatles Revolver.
The Beatles Revolver. This is Paul.
And this is Clark the Shark. And this album, everyone loves it and raves about it. It's so great.
It's better than Sgt. Pepper.
But the truth is, sadly, this album is overrated. You might even want to talk to Ringo and get his opinion. Because this album starts off amazing. I mean, come on. The Beatles Revolver. It just. It hits you with Taxman right off the start. I mean, that's an incredible song. Taxman, of course. 1-800-449-8255, The Clark the Shark Show. George Harrison song starts it out, man. What kind of Beatles album starts out with George Harrison? The first song. Oh, look at the 5 stars it gets. I mean, is this thing really better than Love Forever Changes or, The Who Sell Out or. I mean, come on. 1-800-449-8255. Clark the Shark Show. I mean, look at all the shit they write on Wikipedia about this album. And it just goes on and on.
Well, I mean, Clark the Shark is Paul. And John's songs weren't very good, so we put Taxman first. And then they put me at Eleanor Rigby.
I mean, Taxman's fucking killer. And Eleanor Rigby is awesome. But then after that, man, this album takes a dive. I'm Only Sleeping, pretty innovative. I mean, the Beatles are trying something new here, John. I mean, it's not one of my favorite Beatles songs. Love You Too by George is very interesting. Once again, it's not one of the Beatles' best. It's totally innovative and interesting. Here, There, and Everywhere is just McCartney crap. I fucking hate that song. And Yellow Submarine is just shit, man. It's a killer Beatles song because it's the Beatles. And for any other band, it would still be good. But come on, man. Yellow Submarine, I mean, I love the song. It's on the Red album, the Blue album, whatever. Those 2 albums. But, I mean, there's 4 songs in a row that, I don't know, man. Now, She Said, track number 7 on side 1 is a song I really like. That's killer, dude. And the Beatles are kind of paying homage to the American garage, that raw rock and roll 1966, Texas punk, San Francisco, LA County rock and roll, all over the country, really. Raw garage rock and roll. John Lennon's tried to write a song like, oh, I want to be hip with that scene over in America. And I mean, She's killer. Taxman, Eleanor Rigby are killer. But I'm Only Sleeping. Love You Too by Harrison is innovative, but nah. Here, There, and Everywhere, we hear the crap on the radio a lot, but it's just McCartney shit. And Yellow Submarine, as great as it is like rubbish for the Beatles. But every time I hear Yellow Submarine, I'm gonna like it because it's the Beatles, and it's innovative. The Beatles are definitely trying something new, desperately on this album. I mean, they're trying to get away from Help, Rubber Soul, Beatles for Sale. They're trying to dive headfirst into the future. And sometimes they hit and sometimes they miss at 1-800-449-8255. Now, side two, things get messy here. Good Day Sunshine. That's another Paul McCartney stinker, man. It's crap. I don't like that song. I hear it on the radio. I might listen to it. In fact, I'll start singing along like a retard. But fuck that song, man. Good Day Sunshine. I don't like it. And Your Bird Can Sing is really good. John Lennon. It's a redeemer. I like it. For No One, that's McCartney crap. I mean, it's a good song. Come on, it's the Beatles, man. But this is not the best Beatles. And Dr. Robert is just another Lennon loser. I mean, that song is just crap. I Want to Tell You, though, by George is really good. I Want to Tell You. It's another song kind of like She Said, where the Beatles are rocking out, trying to pay homage to the American 1966 raw guitar garage sound, Almost like the Beatles are doing a tribute to that band, The Remains, or maybe the Standells, the Count Five, or the Music Machine. Like they're tipping their hat going, hey, America, we love you. We wrote a couple of songs. She said, and I want to tell you. These are from George now, not John. But Got to Get You Into My Life is just more McCartney shit. The song is crap. I mean, it's innovative and it's killer compared to other bands. But Got to Get You Into My Life, man, is overrated. This whole album is overrated. Let me tell you right now, this album, Revolver, is not Rubber Soul. It's not even Help, man. Those albums are better. And this album is not, no way, man, it is not Sgt. Pepper. And Paul be like, Clark the Shark, bloody hell. This album's in between Sgt. Pepper and Rubber Soul. How can it be bad? It's 1966. Yeah, I'm like, I ain't saying it's bad. I'm saying the Beatles were trying too hard here on this album. They're doing too much. They're too desperate to change that Beatles sound. And everybody fawns over this album. Oh, this Beatle album, Revolver, is so great. That's all you ever hear. Oh, it's better than Sgt. Pepper or the White Album. BS. What a bunch of rubbish. Bunch of crap. This album is no White Album. This album is no Sgt. Pepper. This album is no Abbey Road. You want to know what I would compare this album to? This album is like Let It Be. It's like that horrible, depressing session where the Beatles are confused and the songs are just not coming together. That's this album, man. The Revolver recording session was the first version of Let It Be, where the Beatles were lost and confused. And they didn't know what they were doing when they did this album. And the fact this album came out so kind of great and neat and cool and all is a miracle. But I'll tell you why that happened is because the Beatles were desperately trying to change the Beatles. They were trying new things here on this album, and they were lunging, just diving headfirst, trying all they could, every measure of every effort the Beatles could muster. And the result was 1966 Revolver. But I'll take the Remains, the Count Five, the Standells, the Music Machine. Man, I'll take the Yardbirds over this album any fucking day of the week. 1-800-449-8255, Clark the Shark Show. Now, what totally saves this album, and for this one song alone makes this album a classic, is Tomorrow Never Knows. Which isn't that melodic or good of a song, but it is so innovative, man. Tomorrow Never Knows sounds like 1967 in 1966. The Beatles are way, way ahead of their time with this song. And I think George Martin had a hell of a lot to do with Tomorrow Never Knows being so great. And it was the first song on this album that the Beatles recorded. And I wish the whole album would have been like Tomorrow Never Knows. And I wish the whole album could have been more like And Your Bird Can Sing and She Said, and I Want to Tell You. There are some good songs on this album. And even the shitty McCartney songs are interesting. For No One, it's interesting, man. Here, There, and Everywhere, as shitty and crappy a song as it is, it's still an interesting song. I mean, the Beatles here are going to the future, and they're lending you a little glimpse into what they're about to do with the next 3-4 albums. And they trip up here. This album is a misfire, people. And people out there got to quit saying Revolver is so great. This album is great mainly because Tomorrow Never Knows is on it, and Eleanor Rigby's on it, and Taxman is on it. But there's a lot of spotty, uneven shit on this album. 1-800-449-8255, The Clark the Shark Show. And I could say the same thing about Sgt. Pepper. You know, the first time I ever played Sgt. Pepper, I wasn't wild about it. But that album is so innovative for 1967. And it's so incredible the way the Beatles are just going into the future and changing. And they changed all of rock and roll and all of music in general with that album. But you could make an argument that Revolver sorta is like the demo precursor to Sgt. Pepper. And there's about 5 or 6 or 7 awesome songs on this album. But to me, Clark the Shark, this album is a bit like the Who, Tommy. It seems incomplete, underplayed, underdone, cold in the middle, half-baked, not finished, like it needs overdubs or something. And yet it's still really good and innovative. You know, all things considered, you know, with all due respect. You know, I gotta say, as much as I hate it, Yellow Submarine is funny. It reminds me of the Who or Ray Davies type of sense of humor. And She Said is a glimpse into like funny, misery, ironic rock. Like, I can't believe Lou Reed doesn't like that song, man. He hates the Beatles. And he's so wrong because the Beatles they're awesome, man. Every album. But I have trouble with Revolver. This album for me is problematic. But I still love it. It's a guilty pleasure. I'll listen to this. Even the really shitty, crappy Paul McCartney songs, I give them a chance, man, because I give everything a chance. But if you're talking about 1966, 1967, man, I will take Arthur Lee and Love albums over this one, especially Forever Changes. And the Who Sell Out. And I'll even take the Rolling Stones' Satanic Majesties one-on-one. I won't take that over this album, Revolver, but I'll compare them. They both trip up and slip up and make the same mistakes brilliantly. I would call the Beatles' Revolver a brilliant failure, you know. But this album is not the amazing, incredible album that all these critics, and especially these young kids from today that are born in 1996 and they think they know the Beatles, you know, these indie kids, you know, that, you know, got into music back in 2007 and they think they know everything. And, you know, they voted for Obama and Hillary 5 times and mailed in, you know, their bullshit at 1-800-449-8255. But from Clark the Shark's standpoint, as a guy that listened to this album since I was 9 years old, 8 years old, 1973, man, I know more than today's indie kids, dude. I know more than fucking everybody. 1-800-449-8255, The Clark the Shark Show. And I'm very disappointed in critics that think this is such a great Beatles album. It is a great Beatles album, but you fucking people make sure you wait for Clark the Shark's opinion before you run your fucking mouth about the Beatles. Because I was listening to the Beatles when you were a fucking sperm at 1-800-449-8255, man. Nobody knows the Beatles like me. I know every album. And I don't want no indie kid from Modest Mouse or some shit telling me about the Beatles, man. Or some fucking creepy douchebag drummer from the Killers or one of those fucking crappy MySpace bands. Don't you tell me about the Beatles, man, at 1-800-449-8255. Clark the Shark listened to this album, Revolver, when I was just a little kid, and I didn't like it as much as other Beatles. No way was this as good as Rubber Soul. Definitely not as good as the American version of Rubber Soul. Definitely this album's not as good as Sgt. Pepper. They're all great albums, though. They're all good. It's the Beatles. It's John Lennon, man. He usually can do no wrong. But to put this one-on-one with the White Album, no way, man. And even the White Album's kind of spotty, kind of sketchy in places. But that album is fucking awesome because once again, the Beatles were going into the future and trying new things. They're doing it on every album in the late 60s. But even in the beginning, on Please Please Me and I Want to Hold Your Hand, the Beatles were always brilliant. They were always innovative. And George Martin was always pulling the greatness out of the Beatles, the harmonies, the songwriting ideas of everybody. And even Paul McCartney sometimes writes great songs, man. I mean, a lot of McCartney Beatles songs I don't like, and especially his solo career. I hate his albums, man. So much McCartney sucks. But there's a lot of good shit he does in the Beatles. You know, Let It Be is good. Hey Jude is fucking killer. And Eleanor Rigby on this album, Revolver, is amazing. Great song. Even if the Beatles don't even play on it, it's so fucking awesome with those violins. It's like a Baroque pop, like a David Bowie classic, but way better than anything David Bowie could ever do. And this album's awesome, man, Revolver, but it is not Sgt. Pepper. It is not Rubber Soul. And if Beatles for Sale had been all original songs without all that crappy cover, man, Beatles for Sale would even have been better than this album, Revolver, from 1966. Gimme the Remains. Gimme the Music Machine. Gimme Count 5. Gimme the Standells. If we're talking about 1966, let's talk about the American garage rock scene. Let's talk about the American Texas punk rock scene of 1966. Give me the Yardbirds, man, if we're talking about 1966, UK, England. Give me the Who, a quick one. The Who, Happy Jack, Substitute, I'm a Boy, all that is better than the Beatles. It's more raw. And the Beatles just got George Martin, man. They got production up the ass. They got way more studio than the Who. But the Who got something going on, man, that sounds like the past and sounds like the future at the same time. The Beatles on Revolver sound like the future, man. This album for 1966 was futuristic. They were going in the innovative future here. And they were blowing minds with many of these songs. It's the Beatles, man. Come on. But it ain't. I don't, man. Fuck, man. This ain't as good as the Who Sell Out. No way. No way. It's about equal. I'd take the Who, Rail, Armenia, City in the Sky. All that shit. Tattoo, Odorano. One-on-one, man. I'd take the Who Sell Out over Beatles Revolver. One-on-one. I would take the Music Machine Talk Talk over this album. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say it. I'd take the Jefferson Airplane Surrealistic Pillow over this album too, but that album probably wouldn't exist without this amazing album by the Beatles, Revolver, and Your Bird Can Sing. I want to tell you, tomorrow never knows. Incredible, the future, the Beatles, John Lennon, the incredible Eleanor Rigby, and George Harrison's Taxman. Amazing song, rocking out with a killer guitar solo. The Beatles Revolver, I would give George Martin as much credit here as the four Beatles. I would, man. And why they left the song Rain off this, the Paperback Writer, which is supposed to be on this, those two tracks could have made this better. You know what? This album, Revolver, should have been a double album. In 1966, it would have gone up one-on-one against Zappa. Oh, man. Had the Beatles made a double album in 1966, Zappa Freak Out would have had competition. Bob Dylan would have had competition from the Beatles, man. This is a single disc, man, but this should have been a double album. And it would have been so much better. It would have been like the first White Album. That's the problem for me with Revolver. These are great songs. These are good songs. Some of it's mediocre. But this whole thing should have been a double album. And then it would have been more understandable for everyone. There should even have been like a 10-minute song to balance out all these short songs by the Beatles. And that would have been amazing. And then that would have made Sgt. Pepper that much more better. At 1-800-449-8255, the Clark the Shark Show. And you just got the most accurate, greatest ever review of Revolver from a guy that's 57 years old. I'm about to turn 58 on April 27, 2023. I was born in 1965. And unlike today's indie kids and today's fake punk kids and today's fake metal Greta Van Fleet kids, unlike them, Clark the Shark knows what he is talking about. Because I listened to these Beatles albums from 1970 when I was 5 years old. 1969, I was 4 years old playing Beatles albums. In the 60s, in 1970, in 1971, when I was 6 years old, listening to the Beatles. I know the Beatles, people, better than anybody. At 1-800-449-8255. Yellow Submarine is good. Tomorrow Never Knows is great. But this album, right here, as incredible and innovative and brilliant as it is, it's overrated, people. It ain't no Sgt. Pepper. It ain't no Rubber Soul. It ain't no White Album. It ain't even the Who Sell Out. No way, baby. But it's fucking killer. The Beatles Revolver. Reviewed by Clark the Shark. 1-800-449-8255. And that's the VR for Sunday. I'm out.